This will be the Lutro Customs. No. That's just a wrong face. He really doesn't care what's going on. This will be the Lutro Customs double wire sleeving guide. Really easy. I'm not gonna lie again and say it's short, but I thought my cat should do the intro today. Hey! Hey! You come back here. You're on dang it. Say more X! Double wires. Probably the most annoying thing to any cable sleever. Unfortunately, many power supply manufacturers still think that it's an awesome idea to do a bunch of double wires. And we all know that it could possibly work out better if they would just do one-to-one pinout. But, you know, cost manufacturing and all that good jazz, and whatever they need to do to make it easier for them to manufacture their power supplies and hopefully help the voltage and reduce noise and whatnot. However, if you are a sleever, you absolutely hate them because they take a lot of time. They're kind of hard to do, at least neatly. I mean, anybody can solder two pieces of wire together and put some sleeve over it, but to do it cleanly and efficiently so that everything lines up is a whole nother question. Now you're probably asking, so what's the big deal about a double wire? Can't you just, you know, sleeve the end of it? Well, let me show you this first. You could, in essence, shove two wires in there, but if you look at this, you'll see that they look perfectly in a row, they fill up the row, and it's all uniform. If you try to shove a double wire in here, what you're going to end up with is a huge bulge on a couple of these wires, depending on how many your power supply has. So, what we try to do is we'll split it somewhere in the middle so that you don't see that. It doesn't hurt the voltages, it doesn't hurt anything, and it looks really good. For instance, I have this cable here. It is an 8-pin PCI to two 6-pins. Now, the only way to do this was to add double wires. Obviously, 8 and 12 doesn't match, and I'm not the best on math, but I can pretty much tell you that that's not going to work out. So, what I did on this extension is I added double wires. Now you'll notice they're all in the same spot, and this will be in the back of the case, this will be in the front of the case, and then you have beautiful extensions. Now you can do this with power supplies as well, which most people want to learn on how to do full power supplies, because if you're doing extensions and you're not doing crazy cables like this, it really doesn't matter. So, what do we need to do this? What we need to do this is a soldering iron. Now this is only the front part of it. This is I think it was 20 bucks, and it's just a soldering iron little station. It works phenomenal. You can get a cheap one at Radio Shack and it'll work as well. However, you know, it's 20 bucks on Amazon. You know, go get one of these. It has a little station, a little base, and I've used a Radio Shack one, you know, over and over, and the little cheap ones, and they just kind of suck. So grab yourself one of these, and I'm going to turn that on in hopes that it'll be hot enough not start a fire by the time that I get there. So you'll need solder. Any kind of rosin core solder will work. You don't really need a lot, so you know, a thin strand will be fine. Obviously this is Radio Shack brand, so it works just fine. It's 0.032 diameter. It's only light duty, but it doesn't really matter. Use whatever solder you want, just don't get really high temperature solder because it's not needed. You need heat shrink. This will help you, and funny enough, it's called Helping Hands, and it should be pretty obvious what it does. Gives you an extra set of hands. This will come in play when we actually do our soldering. You need your wires that you need to make into doubles. You want a lighter or a heat shrink gun. For this demonstration, I will just be using a lighter because, well, it's right there and it's easy to grab out and it doesn't make a bunch of noise. You'll need an X-Acto knife with a very sharp blade. If it's dull, you're going to have kind of a hard time. And I like to use a pencil. I use a pencil because I can mark on the black wire and be able to see it. Now, you might not be able to see it on camera, and for that I apologize. But you'll get the gist of the point when I start in. So, we are back to my old enemy, math. You can see I have a ruler. It's actually drilled onto my desk because, well, I got sick of bringing it out all the time, and it's just easy to have there, and it doesn't move on me when I'm trying to measure. First, what we'll try to do is we'll take the main wire. This is the wire that we're going to splice the other wire into. So we'll line it up on the ruler. You don't really need to see me doing it in full, but you can get the gist of it just by looking here. And let me zoom. Oh, that is not zooming. And come on, camera. Nice. Alright. Should I just say Molex randomly? Like right there? That was a good one, wasn't it? So, you will see that it's one line underneath the 13. You'll also know really quick that I am ruler dumb. You know, in grade school when they teach you your months and you know how to read a clock and how to read a ruler? Well, I wasn't really paying attention. But I know enough to be dangerous. So, what I'll do is I'll take my pencil. I'll remember that that is where it is. So, the cut I want to put on here, you're always going to want to put your cut somewhere in the back of the case. So if you're doing this on a power supply, you don't want it right coming out of the power supply because then you'll be able to see it unless you have, you know, an encase or enclosure over it. So I choose to try to do it in the back of the case because you can hide it better, you don't have to worry about it being seen. So these are short extension wires, so you're just going to have to, you know, measure out your own, and everybody's are going to be different. So you want the split to be either in the back of the case or hidden, because nobody wants to see that. You would just want to see something like this. So for this demonstration, what I will do is I will split it, I don't know, let's go towards the front. And you really can't see the front, so what I will do is I will flip this wire so you guys can see it. You'll notice that this has a male and a female connection because it's an extension wire. So let's say I wanted to do it at, let's go 9 right here, which you guys can't see. There we go. Perfect. So we're going to do it at 9. So when you do this, you got to think you need about 1/4 of an inch to be able to open up the wire and insert the other wire. So we'll measure from here to here, and you can see I marked where that 1/4 of an inch is. I'm going to mark my wire quite heavily with the pencil because, you know, you want to be able to see it. And what I like to do is just go ahead and mark the whole area on one side. Now, actually, you can see that pretty good. Good. So what I'll do is I'll take an X-Acto knife and cut right there and cut right there. However, we have our other wire, and we want to splice our other wire in while at the same time keeping the same length. So once you have that in there, you'll see that they're lined up, and I lined both of them just right. So you got to think, you need 1/4 of an inch around this area. So you just can't cut right here. You would want to cut, actually I take that back. You do want to cut right here. So you'd measure them the same. You know, I'm really OCD-ish with this. You can see they're lined up, and you're going to make a mark on your other wire. And you're going to mark it right here. Now, if I were to cut the wire right there, what would happen? I would end up stripping the wire back too far. So what we'll do is we'll put the mark right at the end. So you're, does that make sense? It should. I'm teaching it. Makes sense to me. If you strip right here, what you'll end up with is this section will be stripped on this wire. So we're going to go ahead and cut this one and strip this one right now. Set this one to the side. Readjust my camera because we don't need to measure anything anymore. Awesome. So this is our wire that we want to cut. Right there is our cut, and we will take, actually I forgot to introduce this. Of course everybody knows if you've been watching my tutorials, these are your snippers. So we'll snip right on that line. This goes on the garbage. We don't need it anymore. If you have a self-adjusting stripper, I would get it, and then I would adjust it to 1/4 of an inch, which is what I did on this one. and we'll snip it off. Now, I noticed that I'm not quite at 1/4 inch, so I was a complete liar, and I did not set it right. All that preparation, totally lost. Out the window. It's always hard to strip tiny little bits off of here. So I'm going to use my fingernail and get it off. There we go. So, now you want to talk? You going to say Molex now? Not close enough. So, we have our wire that's stripped. We're going to get rid of our little bits here. Put that to the side. Now we're going to find on here where we did that spot mark. Now we're going to take our X-Acto knife, and what we're going to do is we're not going to cut through this wire. We want this wire to stay intact all the way through. The reason being is that if you keep this wire intact, you have less of a chance, almost none if you're measuring right, to make your cable off. Because if you're doing a double wire, you want your wires all to match up. You want every single one to be the same length. Now, if you're doing a power supply, you got to understand that they're whipping out those wires like crazy, and the chances of each one being perfectly right on with each other are kind of minimal. So get a ballpark of what your wire is supposed to be. And if you're doing it from a power supply, you'd have your power supply sitting over there, and you'd have your wire in front of you. And again, you'd want to do this so that the split ends up in the back of the case or in a place that's hidden. So what we're going to do with this wire is we're not going to cut it, but we're going to slowly strip off the insulation from this area. Now, that's why you need a really, really sharp X-Acto knife. And you're going to try to make a groove, and you can feel when you're hitting wire. If you're not putting pressure down, your X-Acto knife will cut through the insulation. If you press down, it's going to cut right through the wire. So I'm going to roll the wire a little bit, making sure I stay in that same groove. You guys can see that. I'm just letting the knife do its deal. And you'll know when you're all the way through because you'll get to the other side. Now I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing. Happy trees. Isn't that a happy... I hope that's not trademarked. I don't want to get sued. So I'm just doing the other thing. You're going to get pencil stuff everywhere, but that's fine. And when you think that you're all the way through, you can stop. So what I just did is I stripped this side and this side, and I just cut a circle right around the wire. So I'm just going to make a slit right down the middle of it. I'm going to use my X-Acto knife and my fingernail to get it off. Voila! So, you don't want to be pulling on this either because this insulation will stretch if you're trying to He-Man it. But this is where we want to get. Now we want to get this soldered. So it's not going to... You don't want to take this and just wrap it around because you don't have enough here to do that. And you wouldn't want to do that in the first place because that's going to leave a huge bulk right here. So when you go and you put your heat shrink on, you're going to have a bump in your sleeve. We don't want that. So what I do is you'll notice that most stranded wire is twisted as it goes through. So we'll twist it counterclockwise or however you need to get it open. And we will stick our X-Acto knife right through the strands. Now you should be able to see what I just did there. I didn't cut anything, I just put my X-Acto knife. And using, woo, shaky, using the very tip, I am going to open it. Now you will see, oh camera, you'll see that I have an opening now for my wire. So this is where the helping hands come in. I'm going to clip my wire over here. I'm going to clip my wire over here. And you will see that I have my little spot right here. I will insert the other wire. But while I do that, sometimes you need to angle your wire a little bit so it stays in. And then I'm going to line up my two stripping points right there. And then I'm going to double check that they're both the same length. Because, you know, stuff happens. And I'm going to readjust it a little bit. just because, again, that OCD is kicking in. So you'll see here that both these are even and it's inside. Now, I lined it up first to get a general idea of where I was at. This is okay. That you can strip off that little bit if you want, but you really don't have to, as long as you're making sure that both of these are lined up with each other. And I'm going to clip them both in here now. Push this a little bit closer. And then you can try to close this down just a little bit. So, this is where we're at. These two sections are perfectly equal. You have your wire inside of the other wire, and you have it twisted over so it's not sticking out too bad without making a large bump. The reason why we're using such a small piece here again is because we don't want to make a big large clump right here when we go ahead and sleeve it. So my soldering iron should be hot enough. And here's the deal. If you want to critique my soldering, go for it. Because all I'm doing is I'm putting a little bit of solder on here, and whether I do it the right way or not, go look up a manual. This has always worked for me. Whether, you know, you're supposed to tin your solder and do all, or tin your iron and do all sorts of crazy stuff, but I rarely do that. So basically I want to say don't do what I'm doing. But like I said, it always works. Once your solder spreads through the wires, you should be good. Put a little bit more on there. And I'm just shaky McGee today. So, I don't have a huge clump on there, but I know that that's soldered. That little black stuff you see on there is just, you know, garbage from my soldering iron before. I'm going to turn off my soldering iron so I don't burn my house down. So, I wonder how many times I said so in this video so far. Somebody's going to count and post it on YouTube. I already know it. Wires are put together, and let that cool down for a couple seconds here, and then we will get started on our sleeve. Awesome. You have a very awesome double wire here. Everything's put together the way it's supposed to be. Now we're going to put sleeve on it. Sleeving one of these is a whole nother question. It takes a little time, and you know what? I forgot to include that re-kneaded super glue. It's not needed, but I like to do it because it makes things way easier. So, now there's another one. Take our awesome sleeving here. In this case, I'm using MDPC sleeving, which is one of my favorite mediums, but everybody knows that. Take our wire, take our sleeving, melt a little bit of it, and then from the very tip of this connector, hopefully you guys can see this. Obviously you see where that the two top wings poke out. I'm going to line right up with that. I'll pull the sleeving down, and I want the sleeving to go a little bit past, oh, you guys can't even see what I'm talking about, a little bit past the wiring here. Obviously you can see I lined it up with the first split of the two wires. And so I'm going to cut it right there. And of course, depending on what sleeving you use, you can't always line it up. You're going to have to try a few times till you know where your lining up markers are. I don't ever measure my sleeve. I always use the pins and placement on the pins, because you know, you don't need a ruler to do it, because once you find your placement, you're good. Just everything has a different placement. And I'm going to put my sleeve on my wire. Everybody's saw me do this before. Okay, you will notice that it's not stretched out yet, but once I do, this part right here is going to come right up to the butt of these, the two splits. So I'm going to do this in heat shrink less style, and I'm not going to explain the method because I've already done it once. Because if I started to try to explain the method again, we would be here all day. You can see I'm a little bit shaky today. Holy smokes. There we go. Elevator music. Actually, I think that was the bunny hop. Oh gosh, I have no idea where that came from. So I'm going to stretch my wire sleeving a little bit here, just to see where it pops out. And it pops right by the butt. So I don't want it to go over the butt, I want it a little bit below the butt. That makes sense? Below the butt. Get your mind out of the gutter. So, why do you have super glue out, Lutro? Well, this is why I have super glue out. I'm going to put some super glue right over this solder joint. I'm going to pull my sleeve up. I'm going to stretch it. I'm going to tap it a few times to get it in the fibers, and then I'm going to let that hold. The reason I'm doing this is because I want that sleeve to stay stretched, and I want it to stay right there. You can use clamps, clothespin, which is a clamp, or some sort of clamp to go ahead and hold that wire right there. But super glue to me works so much easier. As long as you're careful, it won't make a mess, and it holds extremely well. And once you got that little brush applicator, it just works awesome. So what we're going to do now is sleeve these. Which is the same method, however, we don't want to go past the butt. Again, get your mind out of the gutter. So I'm going to, since this is such a small area, I'm going to stretch the sleeve a little bit and hope that I got close to where I wanted to be. Normally I would have split those, I would have split those two apart just so I could get it close to the same, but what I'm going to end up doing is cheating here a little bit. I'm just going to measure against the first piece. Sometimes this works for me, sometimes it doesn't. But again, being that they're so small, we shouldn't have any issues with that. And melt the edges again. And you don't want to really melt the edges, you just want to seal it a little bit, and that helps against fraying. So we're going to put the sleeve over these connectors. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. That is not out. Out. There we go. Now you can see everything. So we are zoomed out, and again, I'm going to pull this apart a little bit. I should be able to do heat shrinkless and still get it pretty tight. So being this is a small section, I will bring it up to the butt of the joint first, and then I'll stretch my sleeve back the other way, and then I'll do heat shrinkless. You'll notice that this is a little close, but I'll fix that right when I put this on here. Again, I got the shakes today. Too much caffeine. I was out biking this morning, that's probably why. My hands go numb whenever I bike, because believe it or not, I got a little bit of... Holy smokes! Shaky! Alright. Whenever I go biking or I lift weights or anything, my hands go numb. Possibly have a little bit of carpal tunnel. And you're like, and you sleeve every day. You are stupid. So, we're going to take the other piece and do exactly the same thing. Again, we're going to put it on. I'm going to put it on. Yeah, there we go. And if you guys don't know, I'm a little weird by now then. I got some issues. Because that is what you get. Lots of weirdness. So, we're going to stretch it all the way down here, and I want to get it a little bit more close to that. Well, I guess it's not the butt joint, it's the front joint now. And so, your other sleeve might get in the way, so you want to try to open that Y as much as possible. And see, this is where the super glue really helps you, because then you can really dig this sleeve, you know, right up in there. And you want to try to get it in there as close as you possibly can, because you don't want to bump there. And I think I'm close enough to be able to do it. So, I'm going to heat shrinkless method this thing. Hopefully this time I won't shake a ton, but that is not guaranteed. And then my lighter hand starts shaking. So much fun. Alright, so we have this all put together. What we're going to do is you'll grab these pins and then we're going to try to shove that wire close as possible. And we know that it's going to work, so we're going to pull it back out after all that work. And you guessed it, a little bit of glue. And you don't need a lot at this point because it's kind of pretty much hold its shape. As you can see, it popped right back because it's such a small piece of wire. Now again, if you touch that super glue and you try to touch other things, what's going to happen is you're going to leave a mark on there. And you don't want to do that. And then your fingers will get stuck. So I'm going to let that super glue dry just a little bit. Then I'm going to try to shove it closer, and then we're going to put some heat shrink on there. So we have our double wire, we have it sleeved, we have the end sleeved, and now we're going to do the joint. Now, you can do this a whole bunch of different methods. My personal preference is that you use as little heat shrink as possible, lengthwise. If you make a joint with a huge piece of heat shrink, it's going to be noticeable and it's going to be ugly, because this, you're going to restrict the area that you have. So if this double pin is on the other side of something, you're not going to have enough room. Again, that means this is an extension and that's a short area, so this is just for demonstration purposes. So it dried a little bit. I'm going to try to shove it up a little bit more, and that is about as good as it gets. So we're going to take our first piece of heat shrink. Now, the reason I use 2 pieces of heat shrink is because I want to use the first one to melt down that solder joint a little bit, because you can see there's still a little bit of a gap in there. Well, we don't want that gap in there because that'll show right through heat shrink easily. And so I'm using MDPC heat shrink here, and it's a little small for this area. And I could have used a needle nose to make this work, but you know, if you tug on it a little bit, you'll get it to go over. It's just being a butthead right now. Now you want to get it about as middle as possible, and we are almost there. Another pro tip, always wash your hands before you sleeve. The reason for that, oh, actually I think I pushed that a little bit too, oh, perfect. Because if you wash your hands, you get all your natural oils and your dirty fingers that you've had everywhere clean, and then you can actually, it grips onto this way, way, way easier. Same thing with the heat shrink and whatnot. So we put this in the middle, and hopefully I can get in closer here so you can see what I'm showing you. Can you pick up what I'm putting down? So this looks ugly. If I just shrunk this really quick, which I'll show you, hopefully not shake everywhere. You gotta be really careful using a lighter to do this too, because you don't want to melt the sleeve. See, if I just shrunk that, that looks really ugly, doesn't it? So what we're gonna do is we're going to use part of the heat shrinkless method to do this. And to do this, again, please be careful so you don't melt your sleeve. And I'm really shaky right now, so I'm not too 100% certain I won't do that. Now, if you burn this heat shrink, do you think that really matters? Holy smokes. I'm trying to get this in the view here. See, I'm trying to show you. Normally I do this really close to my chest because so I can see it. And it is messing with my head right now. But you guys can see what I'm doing. I'm just passing over it. I'm letting the heat shrink melt the sleeving. I'm going to form it a little bit because all that plastic underneath there right now is kind of moldable. And I want to do it a little bit more. It's looking better and better as we go here. Again, I'm not too certain I won't melt the sleeve because I'm really shaky today. It's looking pretty good to me. So, we have turned that solder joint and our doubled, whatever you want to call it, pathway butt, pick a word. It's not looking ugly anymore. Now it looks like it forms into the other wire and goes straight, just like you would see, one of the ones they make heat shrink couplers like this that are formed. But we want to put one more layer on it to make it look good, because we probably burnt that sleeving a little bit, or the heat shrink. So we're going to try to fix it. And your other piece of heat shrink should go on just right. Now here's the deal. If you don't completely line this up perfectly, who cares? But remember, when you're putting this piece of heat shrink on there, that the one underneath of it's going to be a little bit smaller. The reason for that being is, it's shrunk already. But we don't need much heat for this. Normally I'd use a heat gun, but again, I don't want to blast your guys' ears with the heat gun. So, doesn't take much to do it. And I don't really have to worry about getting it tight, but I do want to get it fully shrunk. I'll let it cool down a little bit, because we don't want to stretch out the sleeving or the heat shrink while it's hot. That's pretty cooled down. And up we go. And there we go. We have a double wire. Lengths are both the same on this side. The original cable length is still the same because we didn't snip it, and you don't have a huge, ugly solder joint right here. So this is your double wire guide. It's easy. We've been talking for a long time now, but they're time consuming. And if you want them done right, you'll take the time to do it. You'll stretch your sleeve on this side right, you'll stretch your sleeve on this side right. And if you make sure that you always put it in the right spot, you'll be good. Another tip for you is, if you want to make these, if you have more than one double wire and you want them all in the same spot, then measure them out. Where are you going to put your heat shrink? Measure out your wire, mark where your heat shrink is on the ruler, and it'll be in the same spot every time. But you need to make sure all of your cuts are continuous and stable. So, hopefully, you'd end up with a cable like this, where they're hardly noticeable, even when they're on colored ones, because they're all going to blend. And that's it. I've had a lot of requests for this, so I'm glad I could, have a couple seconds here to bust this out for you guys. If you have any questions, you are more than welcome to, ask me on YouTube, Facebook, Facebook.com/Lutro Customs, or OCN, which now has a cable and sleeving subforum under Case Mods. And that's where I tend to spend a lot of my time. You will see some guides coming out here soon. I'm going to try to work on a couple mods that I have, and of course I'll share that as I go as well. So, that's it. Thanks for joining, and as always, thanks for your subscriptions, your nice comments, and have a good day.